Hello, I've decided to skip the string functions and go directly to aggregate functions, partially because you'll be using these more often. You can look at the chapter if you want for string functions. The chapter, by the way, is just to show you, it's in Learning SQL on PostgreSQL, and it is the third chapter. So the aggregate functions are functions that operate on several rows or even tables at all at once. There are a lot of aggregate functions, but I'm only going to focus on the most common. All right, so if we look at PG Admin 4, I've already set it up again so you don't have to watch me type. And what functions will do are the maximum, which brings back the largest value, the minimum, which brings back the smallest value, count, which just brings back the number of values, sum, which totals them, adds them all up, average, which gives you the mean average of the group of values, and then I'll show you how to use group by and halving. So we'll start with max. So we're looking for the highest donation amount ever from donation. So when we run that, we'll see that the highest amount was ever was $10,000. And again, it's just select max, the function name, parentheses for the field that you're, or value that you're working on. So donation amount is a numeric value, and I aliased it highest, and it's from the table donation. We're going to do exactly the same, but look for the smallest donation. And the smallest donation is $25. If we want to see how many donations there are, we can do that, and we have 67 donations. Couple of side notes, min, max, count, average, all of these aggregate functions ignore nulls. So if there's a value is a null, it will not be considered as part of the average or part of the count. You can look at the chapter in the book if you want to see how to deal with that if you need to make it count in some way. Basically, you have to change them all to zeros temporarily. All right, so here's the average. This is the average donation amount, and the average is 1,033 and 50 cents, 51 cents maybe. And this is the sum. And the total amount in here is $69,244.95. So that's sum, average, count, minimum, and max. Those are the ones that I'm going to do. Now you can do a couple of other things with these. So I wanted to show you count. Again, if we do all the count of person keys, that will give us all of them, even repetitions. If I put the word distinct inside the function, it will ignore repetitions. And you can do this with any of the aggregate functions. So notice that there are 67 all-time donors, all donors, but there are 64 unique donors. So it doesn't repeat. That means like 3 people donated more than once. All right. Now this one is a more complicated and actually much more useful. So we are going to extract the year from the donation date, but then we're going to get the count of donations for each year. We're going to get the sum for each year, and we're going to get the average for each year from donation. But we have to group by extract year from donation. Extract is not an aggregate function. It is what they call a scalar function. It operates row by row. The aggregate functions operate on groups of rows, so there's an inherent contradiction there. And the way that you deal with it is you group by anything that is not an aggregate function. So we have to group by the year. We also can order by that year. So what this gives us is something more interesting. As I've said, we can see that there was 2020, there were 35 donors, and there were a total of $229,397, an average of $839. In 2021, there were 32 donors, but there was a total of 39,847 and an average of 1245. All right, so 221 had fewer donors but more money. And again, this is starting to make a useful report. You can see the things, what the group by does. It groups it by year. This is going to do the same thing but format it so that you don't have all those trailing decimals in the average. And the format, we're just using the to-car sum that we used before and giving it a format. And so everything has dollar signs and 2 decimal places. It's a little bit neater. Same functions before. The other thing I wanted to show is that you can embed functions, to-car, and it embeds the sum. All right, to-car, and it embeds the average. You can put functions inside of other functions. All right, so we're going to look at the grant type key. That means what kind of grant it is. When we do joins in the next chapter, I will show you how to get the words instead of the numbers. We're going to do count, sum, and average from grant application, and we're going to group by the grant type key because we have to group by it because it is not an aggregate. And then we'll order it by that key too. So we got 7 to 9, that's the type. We've got the numbers, how many there are of each one of these. And we've got the totals and then the averages. And again, this could be formatted. I'm not going to do it at this point, but you could format that to look nicer. There's no 8 there because 8 was never asked for. I wanted to show you one last thing about these. So, you have to group by anything that has an aggregate. Anything that's not an aggregate in the mix of aggregates. So grant type key is not an aggregate function, so you have to group by it. Same with date. You have to group by date because it's not an aggregate function. All right, so we're grouping by grant type key. This is the same as up above. But we're also only going to look at the ones that have a sum greater than 3,000. But you can't use the word where when you're dealing with an aggregate. You have to do having. So we're going to group by the grant key, and the having always comes after the group by. And we're going to look only at those that have a sum of the grant application amount greater than $3,000. And when we do that, we'll see that it only shows those that are greater than $3,000. So having is what you use instead of where when you are dealing with an aggregate in the criteria. So there's the aggregate in the criteria. We're looking for where the sum is greater than 3,000. I'm going to do a quick repetition just to go over them again verbally. Max gives you the highest amount, all right, of a numeric amount. Actually, they actually work on words too, text types, but it uses the numeric value of the text type to determine that. Min is the lowest amount. Count just counts the number of items. Average gives you the mean average, and sum gives you the total. So again, count and distinct in here, the difference is that it only returns unique person keys. So it doesn't give you any repetitions. And you can do distinct with like average. You could do distinct with like sum too. You could do it with any of them. This one, we extract the year from the donation date, like in the last video where we talked about date and time. It is not an aggregate function because it operates on every individual row. Count, sum, and average are aggregate functions because they operate on groups of rows. And the group that we're going to do is by the year. We have to group by everything up here that is not a part of the aggregate functions. And again, this is just a formatted version of the other. This is a group by again. We have the grant type key and we have to group by it. These are really useful. These group bys allow you to create meaningful reports out of your data. And having is what you use instead of a where clause when you are having an aggregate function in the criteria. I will show you one other little detail that isn't part of here. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to put this, and I want to show you can do a where also. Let's add a where. Let's just exclude the last one. I'm going to say where the type grant type key and you don't do the, but I will do where not grant type key equals 7. We'll exclude 7. All right, and then we will run this. And notice that it works just fine. You can have a where and a having together. The where works because there is no aggregate involved in that. And notice that the where comes before the group by. It will always come before the group by if you have a where. The having deals with aggregate values in the criteria, and it always comes after the group by. All right, I think that's good for this video on aggregate functions. Again, you can get a more thorough discussion in the book. So if I go back up to here, the book has a much more thorough discussion of the aggregate functions and other issues. The next thing that we'll talk about will be joins. And I will probably break the joins up into multiple videos as well. So have a good afternoon.